large spectrum of bisexual, pansexual, and bi plus politics. On this topic, we're going to talk about research and activism. As you know, I'm Aurelio Castro. I'm both a researcher and a bi plus activist in the Italian community for the last 10 years. I've organized different national and local pride for bi plus people. And I'm really proud to host this session as part, of course, of this never-ending conflict on where we belong. Are we more activists? Are we more researcher? We go beyond this kind of binary. And today we're going to talk and discuss about all of these issues with our amazing speakers. And of course, if you want to integrate or continue on a debate on the previous session, please let's move more fluid a session where we can discuss both in research, activism, and in community. So I'm really happy to welcome Corinna Griesberg as our first speaker for the panel, if she is here. Or
yeah.
she'll have coffee. Hello, Mona. Thank you for being here. And today you're going to talk with us about the future of Bio Plus research. So thank you, and the floor is yours. If you need to present anything, please do so. We'll try to cover that too.
Okay. Thank you for introducing me. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Mona, she, her pronouns. I'm from Germany, but I just finished my master's in social and cultural psychology. And for my master thesis, I did a project on bi plus research. And I focused on intergroup discrimination and coping with intergroup discrimination. And just so you're prepared, this session is going to be like less of me talking, more of me listening. So I brought some questions for us to discuss and to think together. I just wanted to introduce myself first and talk a bit about my research and why I came up with this idea for this discussion. And then I prepared a Mentimeter with some questions where you can put in your answers and we can start talking more. Yeah, so for my master thesis, I did a qualitative study with interviews with plurisexual women in Ireland, and I interviewed them about their experience with the wider LGBTQ plus umbrella, if they had experienced discrimination by other LGBTQ plus people. And unfortunately, but also not very surprisingly, I found that they had experienced biphobia by other LGBTQ plus people, and they also had witnessed other forms of discrimination, such as racism, xenophobia, ageism, ableism, sexism, all that. Yeah, and I also talked to them about coping strategies, so how they dealt with that kind of discrimination and how that made them feel. And when I was writing up my report for my thesis, I had to come up with implications and recommendations, what to do with this, what that tells us. And yeah, so I started thinking, reflecting, what do I take from this? And I realized that actually it felt a bit wrong for me to have to come up with those implications, because I felt like, who am I to say what we should take away from those reports? And I was wondering, okay, what could I have done differently with my research? And I was thinking, maybe I should have asked my participants, which change do you want to see? Which improvements do you want to see? How can we reduce the discrimination within the LGBTQ plus umbrella? How can we create more inclusive and safer spaces, instead of assuming that I know best? So I'm still considering staying in bi plus research. And I'm considering doing a PhD on a bi plus research topic, but at the moment I'm feeling a bit confused, to be honest, about how to conduct research that is sustainable and has an actual real life impact, instead of just being research that is just done for the purpose of research. So I want to do something that has the lasting impact and does something good for the community, for politic developments and all that. So that's why I started thinking about the future of bi plus research and where I want to go as a researcher and where we as a field want to go. Yeah, so that's why I came up with this idea. And I'm going to try and share my screen. And I'm going to ask you to Google Mentimeter and put in the code that you'll see. You can see this. Yeah, so if you go to the website, if you put in the code, you can fill in your answers. And I brought you 3 questions, one about the past, one about the present, and one about the future. And we're going to start with the past. And this question is particularly for people who have done research on BIPOC matters. And I mean, we've already gotten a good overview today. And with the schedule, we kind of know which topics are here presented. But I wanted to ask everyone again to reflect on the research topics they have worked on, which questions they have covered, their interests. So that we can kind of see what is represented in our group. Health outcomes, bisexual erasure, community, media representation, coming out, community engagement, parenthood, identity, migration, refugee asylum, social construction of bi, internalized biphobia, workplace. It's really interesting and fascinating to me how diverse the topic of bi plus research is. Masculinity, social media, invisibility, activism, support groups, history, religious trauma. Okay. Okay, I don't think, maybe there are a few last inputs coming in. Social linguistics, inclusivity, politics. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm going to move on to the second question, where I'm also asking you to fill in the questions, but I would also invite you to unmute yourself if anybody wants to go more into depth about their thoughts on this. So I don't know if you want to raise your hand or just unmute yourself if you want to talk a bit more about this, or if you just want to write something, you can also fill it in. So the questions is, where do you see the current state of BI+ research, and which issues do you see? So I think something that someone would like to see more is addressing monosexism as a systemic structure of power rather than just like an interpersonal issue. Diversity and intersectionality. Yeah. And oftentimes in the discourse, we just talk about the LGBTQ plus umbrella without addressing the specific experiences of BI+ people. Social class, intersectionality within BI+ communities, health. Someone also writes, we should just be curious and let us drive that. Let that drive us. Mental health, violence, psychology of sexuality. Okay. Do we have anybody who would like to tell us a bit more about their opinion on what needs changing in the current field? What do you feel is missing? Which issues do you see? I'd also be curious, like beyond the topics, what structural issues do you see, like with funding, with appreciation of research, with respect for research, or your position as a researcher?
I'm happy to jump in here and say a little bit about it. One of my answers was this one about, I'm pointing with my mouse as if everyone can see, the one about aggregating BI+ people within the LGBTQ umbrella. And obviously the LGBTQ umbrella can be a useful way to group people, and it can be great for community building. But at the same time, I think often studies fail to report on how the experiences of bi+ people might differ from other groups within that umbrella. So I think sometimes that umbrella can kind of mask the unique aspects of being bi+, and therefore we can't really learn about bi+ people's experiences or lives when we kind of use this massive umbrella term. And I think it also makes literature searching really hard as a researcher, because you type in bisexual, and often studies have bisexual as a keyword, or in the abstract or in the title, and then you go to the results section and they actually report nothing to do with bisexuality at all, which is really frustrating. And so things like systematic reviews are really, really difficult in that respect.
Yeah, thank you for your input. That was also my experience with my research for my master thesis. Finding literature, I thought, okay, this might be helpful me, but then in the end, there wasn't much content about bisexuality. Hugo?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is I think researchers rely too much on queer communities, queer organizations, and groups connected to queer communities to recruit bi+ participants. And they need to come up with much better strategies to reach out to people who might be mostly closeted and fully closeted and who are not connected to those communities, especially folks in man-woman relationships. But at the same time, don't underestimate how many people in same-sex relationships are fully closeted as bi+ to their partner, because there's stats that came out on that recently in Europe, and that's quite startling. The other thing is, the most insightful conversation I've had about research methods on bisexuality and pansexuality was in a workshop that I did with a bunch of 16-year-old queers a couple of months ago, who basically, and there was a section I was presenting like the typical research stats and facts that we often throw around as activists, and they basically read those research methods to filth. So because they identity-based paradigms on designing researches stop working at some point if you go deep enough into queerness. And we're seeing a lot of multiplication of micro-identities and labels, and I don't think researchers can always play chase the next category. And I would say include a bunch of 16-year-old queer kids in designing your research, but also move away from something that centers on identity categories and look more at like systemic structures of powers and who's impacted by that, and see if there's a way of like using another thread to look at people's experiences than an identity-based framework, because I think we can really run to the limits of that.
Yeah, thank you. I have many thoughts on this, but we don't have so much time, so Aurelio.
No, well, please, I can say these things later. Please continue.
Okay, I'll just say real quick that this resonates with me a lot, especially what you said about participation, like finding participants. In the beginning, I did my research in Ireland, so it's a very rural country, and we have a lot of small towns with many people who are very isolated, who are in small communities where there's a lot of talking, and many people don't have access to resources, or they need to travel to the next town and to the big cities to get in touch with LGBT+ organizations. So there must be so many people who don't have contact to those organizations that you would never reach through that recruitment method. So I also used LGBT+ organizations to recruit my interviewees, and I was aware from the beginning there's so many people that I won't reach with this, and it's really a big loss, because if I don't do research about them, then I also can give recommendations based on those people's needs. Yeah. And I also like what you said about including young people and going beyond labels and looking at it from a more structural level, because if we look at bigger structures, I think it's also easier to translate the findings into recommendations for politics and structural changes. Yeah, Aurelio?
Thank you. No, amazing points. And I would definitely say that I'm quite tired of being baited by queer theory, by some kind of queer theories that talk about queer, but in the end, it's mostly gay and cisgender. In a similar way of what Hugo was talking about, like when identity-based research just has its limits. And at some point I grow really tired that just this only queer theory that I found were actually just based on monosexuality in the end, than actually taking into account different kinds of experiences and identities beyond genders. And I think also that's one of the issues that gets some friction between bi plus queer researchers and other queer researchers.
Yeah, thank you. Ellen?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that someone said lack of funding for bi+ research. 100% agree. This is one of the major issues that we kind of face. Kind of step one of being able to conduct any research would be to have funding to do so. I think part of that links to the lack of statistics we have about the number of bi+ people. Which, I mean, it depends what type of research you're doing, but particularly in kind of health research and more psychology and health sciences and social sciences, we often need statistics to back up why research is important. And we can't just say this is interesting to me. We need to have those kind of very solid stats on this % of the population are bi+, and this is why, like, there are a significant minority of people who are bi+, and therefore we need funding to research this population to know how to better support this population. And you have to go through this kind of steps of justifying your research. And I mean, I'm going to talk from a UK centric point of view because that's where I'm kind of based, but in the UK it wasn't until 2021 that population-wide data on sexual orientation was collected. And obviously you can debate the ethics of collecting data on sexual orientation and whether that is actually accurate data, but sometimes we do need to be able to justify how many bi+ people there are to say that we need funding so that we can actually do research. So I think it comes back to kind of lack of visibility and knowledge about how many people are bi+ in the very early stages of the research process.
Thank you, Ellen. Mona, could you show us another pages of the answers, because someone ran in the chat was asking to see more.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I think I also only had 15 minutes, so we also need to move on to the last question, which is a bit more positive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I can take screenshots later and put them in the chat if someone wants to see the answers. Okay, so the last question is about the future. So we talked about the issues, and now the question is, okay, what gives us hope? What inspires us? Maybe there's research you've seen that you found really impactful, visionary, maybe something in relation to like collaborating with activists and communities, new recruitment methods, new research methods. Yeah. So feel free to write it in, and maybe you also have time for one or two vocal comments. Okay, so we have grassroots projects, disability justice, young activists, bisexual acceptance, community research in the global south, I guess, intersectionality, race, ethical bi+ research, community engaged research, queer community inclusion, visibility, intercultural research, participatory action research, intercontinental collab, people of color, researchers working with more communities. Okay, do we have anybody who wants to say a bit more about a particular project or a thought that they have about this? Yeah. Well, I can say that one thing that gives me hope is this event here and the passion that I see in all of you and the vision that you have. We have someone who raised their hand, Lynn.
Yeah, honestly, there's this one paper, it's legitimately called Deconstructing Biphobia. And I think that that one really gave me hope because towards the end, they explain a lot about how bisexual people are more than just like discriminated against, they're oppressed within LGBT spaces, and it's detailed via different like dimensions. And I think that being able to see it through that lens really helps just counteract exactly what it is that is keeping bisexual erasure alive. And I think that provides a lot of context. So in the fight, that gives me hope.
Thank you. Maybe if you still know where you found it, you can put it in the chat if other people want to look at it too. Okay, I think my time is up. We have to continue.
Thank you so much for allowing us actually to brainstorm on this and what we need. There has been also of good flaming comments in the chat, because we need, of course, funding, and we have to tell that to the funders. And I also think we have to tell this to the Gay Lesbian Association, because actually they receive funding for all the LGBTQIA plus identities, but most of the time those funds are not actually shared equally. Which is something that happens also here in Italy, and I'm sure you have the same issue in your countries, wherever you are. That's not something we can talk about. So I would like to welcome also Bailey Merlin, hoping I'm pronouncing this right, and Jeiselynn and Rios Rivera, and they are going to talk with us about queering academia, how bisexual insights impact and bridges research and activism.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much. We're both very happy to be here. Lynn, you got our slides.
Hi, everyone. My bad. It's my computer's not great, but we're here. Hi.
Hi.
All right. Is there any way that we can share our screen?
Sure. Which one of you is going to share?
Lynn.
I got it.
Try it, and I think our super wizard, techno wizard Derek is going to allow it.
Great. Here we are. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn. My name is Jeiselynn. Everybody just calls me Lynn. I'm from Puerto Rico, so my name can sometimes be difficult to pronounce. I am a second-year master's student at the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program at the University of Albany, and I am here presenting with Bailey Merlin on queering academia. Bailey, if you could.
Hi, everyone. Bailey Merlin. I also love it when I hear my last name pronounced Merlin, because it sounds even classier. So thank you for that. And I will say that I am an author and a journalist, a writer, and I recently graduated from Harvard Medical School with my master's in media, medicine, and health, which looks at the intersection of healthcare and storytelling. And my master's thesis was all about how bi-erasure creates barriers to healthcare. So I'm really excited to be here with Lynn to discuss sort of the activism side of things while she talks about the academia side of things.
All right, so we have a question, right? Why are we here? Bisexuality has consistently demonstrated a profound impact and transformation within the lives of those who identify as bi+. And our own affinity towards trying to get and create and participate in bi+ spaces is exactly what reinforces the need to extend this great transformation towards a larger community of people. And it is through bisexual insights that we are able to imagine what a world that disregards binaries begin to look like. The interesting part about bisexuality, right, is that it has a lot of things that it needs to do. All sexuality labels have a lot of work that they need to do and communicate in just one word. So as bisexuality disregards these binaries, we want to ask the question here today, what does this world look like?
And as we go through this presentation, I do just want to acknowledge that we will be using the term bisexuality, not to be exclusive, but rather for the sake of being brief. So we're going to use the Robin Oakes definition here being the potential to be attracted romantically and or sexually to people of more than one gender, not necessarily at the same time, not necessarily in the same way, and not necessarily to the same degree. Go ahead.
So bisexuality reveals. And that's because bisexuality creates a lot more questions than it has answers for. It doesn't determine what my gender is. It doesn't determine the gender of my potential partner or partners. And that's really all a sexuality label has to do, right? It has to say what I am, what I find attractive, what I don't find attractive, and the potentiality of how my future would look like. And that's a lot of work for one word to do. That's just a lot of effort. So especially as it relates to just the complexity of the human experience as we take it in this sort of longitudinal exploration of a whole life. And that's the thing, we're humans, we contain multitudes, including contradictions. So bisexuality does provide unique insights in it that it's an intermediate category. It starts to ask us questions in terms of what does homo and heterosexual even mean? Why is it that that is the primary or sometimes the only inclusion-exclusion criteria for intimacy? It begins to ask us the question, what are other things that can be considered the primary inclusion or exclusion criteria? It can be whether or not you like Taylor Swift. That's a deal breaker for me. You're not willing to listen to All Too Well 10-minute version? We can't date, sorry. And it is incredibly subversive and revolutionary. It destabilizes the primacy of sex. We can occasionally suspend our belief in that someone is heterosexual to consider that maybe they might be homosexual. Why does bisexuality disappear there? And it is in that own revolution that we begin to understand that there are more questions to be asked and there is less that is commonly understood. And within that,
yeah, I just wanted to sort of like talk about within that that experience. I think it's important for us to contextualize bisexuality as researchers, activists, and as people who identify as bisexual. So Lynn, will you please tell us about your experiences as a researcher and academic?
So I've been in academia for as long as I can remember, to the extent that this is my 4th year in graduate school, and I have been taking every single class I can find that relates to gender and sexuality. What I have found in my own trajectory is that I have to beg for bisexual literature to be a part of the search. What I have found is that I am currently taking a class on the sociology of gender and sexuality, and amongst all of the modules that we do not have a single article on bisexuality and how it constantly challenges both gender and sexuality at a social and structural level. That said, we do have included gay and lesbian theory. We do have included queer theory. We also have included asexuality and the sexuality of how children explore themselves. So these are the questions that we bring to the table as bisexual people. It is about questioning these constant binaries, and it is about being a lived and embodied questioning of gender, sexuality, and even monogamy.
And on the other side of this coin, which as Lynn and I discussed it more and more, we found that activism and academia really should go hand in hand if this conversation around bisexuality and research is ever going to move forward. And in an activist space, as someone who is constantly saying, where's the money for bi+ people? Where are the organizations for bi+ people? Why aren't we being funded? You're constantly being shouted down by other queer groups that say you're not important because you are not queer enough. And it can be really exhausting, especially for people who exist in these activist spaces as organizers, to constantly be told you do not matter because you are not queer enough. And it's like, how do we continue to fight the good fight if no one thinks that we matter except for the people who are bisexual, who themselves might feel erased, who might feel like, oh, well, if everyone's saying I'm not queer enough, then I should be quiet. I should go away and seek community elsewhere. I think what's really interesting, especially in New England, I live in Massachusetts, which is a very blue state and has queer resources, especially for youth. When I was doing some research for a project, I went to a youth group and said, where's the bisexual programming? Do you have any bisexuals? And they said, we don't have any bisexuals. And I'm like, that's statistically very unlikely to be. And I asked why. And those bisexual kids had been bullied out of the group by other queer children because they weren't queer enough and they were taking up resources. So this idea that Lynn and I are talking about, like, you have to fight to get yourself seen, is just, I think most people on this call, if you identify as bi, you recognize the struggle. And so Lynn, could you talk a little bit about your experience as a bi person in that, like, in this context, I guess?
Of course. Right, the University of Albany has actually this center that we call the not the bisexual, the Gender and Sexuality Resource Center. And what I find incredibly interesting is that I continue seeing the very same thing. It is a lot of lesbian and gay men activism, and a lot of presentations surrounding that. I find a lot of information surrounding asexuality, a lot of information surrounding gender transition. And it's really interesting because you'll talk to the coordinator and they will say, yeah, most of our constituents, so most of the people that come are bi+. And then there are no events. So when I got onboarded as part of staff, it was all about, hey, we need more bi+ events. And I'm like, yes, you do. And I still haven't had time to actually properly do anything because I'm bombarded with all of this other work. So in order to bridge research and activism and ask the questions that are important and the need to come out, it is important to continuously place yourself in the middle of this, to just always, with non-violent force, resist, and that we cannot be pushed aside within these spaces that are meant to bridge. Bailey, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on to that.
I do, but in the interest of time, I want to talk about being a killjoy. So can we go to the next slide?
Absolutely.
And how presence being resistance, exactly what you're talking about here, and how it is our responsibility as bi+ people who have already agreed to be more out than the people around us. And I assume all of you here, you're talking about your research, you're talking about your lives. You need, like, our responsibility is to take up space. And Lynn, what does that look like in academia?
Honestly, I am a bisexual killjoy. If anybody is not familiar with the term killjoy in general, it's proposed by Sarah Ahmed in Living a Feminist Life, and she makes a call to be a feminist killjoy, to always bring feminism to the table. And I think that applies to bisexuality as well, very, very much. Ask the question, where is the bisexual literature? Where are my own resources? Where are my activities? Where are my people? And it is that resistance that creates persistence, that makes us more visible, that allows us to actually demand for what we need and ask for the spaces and the affinity that we're constantly searching for. And to the extent that we shouldn't and we can't continue allowing others to constantly exploit and oppress bisexual people in favor of different causes, because we are a cause, and we are the cause that will revolutionize the way that we conceptualize sexuality and sexual identity. And within activism, I think that there is a lot more that we can do. Bailey?
I absolutely agree, because I have achieved this point in my own sort of activist life where I no longer care if I make people uncomfortable. You know, when you go into these spaces and you say, oh, we don't have any bisexual programming. Why? Well, all of the bisexual youth got bullied. That's messed up. What are you doing about it? And just sort of like going back again and again to make space. It's not my job to make anyone comfortable, especially if there are millions of bisexuals around the world who aren't getting access to community. They're not getting access to healthcare. They're sick. They're chronically sick, like statistically more so than many other queer groups. It's not my job to make you happy. It's my job to like resist on behalf of other bisexuals. And so I want to go to next steps and talk about what you can do for the bisexual community, which is, as we've seen, be seen, make some noise. I do want to say that it can be as little as having bisexual in your bio on your Instagram or your TikTok, because people get into fights with me about it. They'll like comment on a TikTok video I make about a book, like say bi plus isn't a real label. I'm like, oh, okay. I don't know what you want from me. And then I know having bisexual resources is very like difficult because there aren't a ton out there, though we are growing. I will say that the Bisexual Resource Center here in Boston has been doing a wonderful job in collecting resources, and I'll put the link in the chat. And Lynn, do you want to also talk about being a Killjoy?
Of course. It's definitely a big thing that has helped me be a Killjoy is high-key finding my own people. Because there is a lot of joy to be found in bisexual spaces. There is a lot of community and a lot of transformation that is created here. Because they happen, because they are volunteer-led, and because they happen despite all of these incredible systemic barriers. And it is in that being a Killjoy, especially for me, it comes up a lot in class. It comes up a lot with my mentors. It comes up a lot when I'm writing. And I refuse to not talk about bisexuality. I refuse to not make it an issue, because it is constantly, and I will not allow myself to continue to be erased. And it is in that being a Killjoy that I find incredibly powerful to bring in the thought process. I am bisexual because gender does not matter to me. I am bisexual because I find myself in the middle of things. I am bisexual because I allow myself to see all of the potential futures of connection and levels of intimacy that are possible in this world, and I am not limited by something as trivial as sex or gender. So I think that it is about 100% just taking up space and being brave enough to do that.
So thank you for attending our talk. We are open to questions and also just like conversation around this. And if anyone has like a Cricut and can make a "We Need Bisexual," like bisexual Killjoy shirts, let's get some merch going. Really, it's a great idea.
Thank you so
100%.
much, Flo, for the amazing presentation and talk. Now let's see if there's been a lot of discussion and thoughts in the chat, but I want people also to engage outside of it. So please feel free to go forward and raise your hand and tell us what you thought about these great words and what can we do to be Killjoys and to also do good research. Because I think one of the main issues is still, after so many years, I mean, it's been like more than 50, 60 years of specific bi plus research. And we still have to explain to people that bisexuality is not attraction to men and women. And I'm fully tired of doing this kind of conversation again and to find wrong definition everywhere, from political institutions to laws to even LGBTQIA plus association and research. So let's talk a bit about that. Any questions for our two speakers? You go.
You go ahead.
One initiative.
No one else wants to go first? Yeah, having been the Killjoy, it can be really tiring.
Yes.
And I think it's important to remember as activists to have fun and to connect with other people who are doing the same thing, to have fun with them, and maybe to embrace more the trickster than the killjoy. I think you can troll people. I think you can mess with people when they deserve that. You know, as they say, disturb the comfortable, comfort the disturbed, like that. And it's important to remember to have fun, because I think a lot of people tire themselves out being the killjoy because it's hard being the killjoy. And the other thing is, like, eyes on the prize. We hear a lot about visibility and representation because these days we're kind of obsessed with language, media, and the realm of the symbolic. But what we're in for is real concrete material change in the lives of people. And it's important that we understand where our actions connect with that. Like, what I want is to build a world that when a 13-year-old finds out that they're attracted to more than just one gender, I want them to be excited. I want them to be thrilled. I don't want them to be confused or scared. This is the world that I want to build. I want it to be exciting to figure out that you're bi plus when you're 13. And that's I think every action we're taking needs to be building towards that. And we need to know that this changes more than just the symbolic world.
I absolutely agree. I do want to underline the fact that statistically speaking, organizing activists have some of the worst health outcomes in the communities that they serve, because it is exhausting to be an activist and an organizer, and especially in a place where we're chronically underfunded and pushed to the side. As I discussed, this idea of bi joy being sort of medicine in a lot of ways, to make sure that you can get up the next day and fight the good fight, as it were. I think, though, as we build our communities and we meet more people, burnout being a structural problem, absolutely. I think it should be a focus of organizers, activists, and academics to find ways to sort of like insulate themselves, so that if I'm having a really poor day, Lynn can pick me up. And if they're having a poor day, I can pick Lynn up. So these community building exercises like this are really, really important to the longevity of the movement.
Yeah, I think that comes back to finding our people. And I want to touch on the point of like excitement. And I think that for me, that has a lot to do with the thought process. That has a lot to do, yes, with the symbolic of seeing bi parades. I think that was a really big thing for me. It was really powerful finding that out. But more than that, it's about opening myself up to a possibility of all and any, of something that I really love to do is that my pronouns are all, any, none. And for me, it's a lot about that in terms of bisexuality as well. I can connect to all and to any at any dimension possible. And that joy of possibility needs to be shared and explored more, especially within and without bi plus communities.
Thank you all for these amazing discussion points. And just getting from the chat, Bran telling us that it's also essential to get connected with others on a personal level, as well as just organizing together. That emotional and social support from bi and spec communities, what makes being a killjoy sustainable through our life and work. Yes, of course, please take care of yourself and those around us, because we have a lot of issues going on right now, and energy is something that we do not spare usually. But I will also add, oh yes, Brent, please.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I decided I want to speak a little bit more on that. Hugo, you said in a response that it's a lot harder to organize personal and organizing work over Zoom, which I absolutely agree with. But I would also say, speaking as I'm a disabled activist, I am homebound. It is my only option. And it honestly, I've made connections all over the world in the past 2 years in the work that I do. And some things have only happened because they are virtual connections. Obviously, local community is essential, and I would never minimize that. But there are people who don't have the opportunity to make local connections, who are able to make those connections, participate, invest themselves, share their skills who are being reached by digital work in a way that they're not going to ever be if they don't like live near Boston or another area that has like long established by groups. There's so much work that can be done online, and you can also build a fulfilling social network online, one-on-one. I've done it. That's most of what I wanted to say. Like it is possible, and I think that we should be investing in that type of work. Yeah, especially like when we talk about bi-health and research into bi-health, making work accessible is so important. Like we can't use these statistics about disability, mental illness, intimate partner violence, trauma in bi communities, and then not make our work accessible on a broader scale.
Thank you so much, Bren. And I just wanted to say that also thank you, because I don't think that most of us could have ever found some really cool suggestion books on bi-politics books without the bi-ban library. And I think that's just by knowing that we have resources online, we can learn a lot. Yes, Lynn, please.
Yeah. Just because like this really touched me. I am also disabled. It has become it has been keenly reminded to me these past 2 years in academia. And I feel the need to reiterate that these virtual spaces are spaces that are of liberation. And because I did not know where my place was in bisexual activism until it was middle of COVID. I had nobody to talk to about my bisexual literature because nobody in my home institution knew about any of it. And I created a bisexual space where we talked about bisexual literature, people from all over the world, and we shared. And that was what kept me going. That was what kept all of us in touch with our own selves and the selves outside of us so that we could connect. And I think that it's important that we also lift each other up in the sense that these spaces are accessibility needs. And I think that to whatever extent we thought that we were making do during COVID, and a lot of bisexual disabled people have found something more than just making do. They have found a home.
Thank you so much. I just have to be the tyrant right now because time is a tyrant, but I have to ask if our next speaker is actually here, Bella Bushby from the Australian podcast community. Are they here around?
I think Bella cancelled and that this document is out of date. So I think we can carry on for, unless I'm wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Bella is coming. So I think we can carry on for maybe 5 minutes and then take a 5-minute break.
Yes, I think we can carry on a bit with this and then having a small break. And sorry, but I just have to ask and check for anyone. It has been an amazing talk with everyone, and I think yes, that virtual communities, maybe for many of us actually, online communities being the first step to find ourselves and to find other people. We know that bi-plus people are not usually found in gay and lesbian spaces. We usually are in some nerdy forum like in the time, and now there are the Discord servers. You can find us in polyamorous communities, in gaming communities, in non-monogamous spaces or in kinky spaces. So, and those have been like the safe spaces, even fan fiction websites and fandoms. That's where most of us bi-plus people actually have been to find refugee. So I guess that's really important that we have these kind of resources. But I wanted just to ask everyone, what actually can we do of any other suggestion, like for engaging young people, young researcher, and how to kind of also prepare and protect them, because we know that it's kind of difficult working on bi-plus sexualities. There's really not many funding, and personally, I know there have been kind of also bad stares and treatment when you actually study any identities outside of the binary. I think it's also valid for aromantic and asexual people, for non-binary people, for transgender scholars and anything. Moving outside those binaries actually puts you like a sign on you that would be difficult as a researcher. So if anyone wants to engage with these topics.
In terms of connecting with more youth, I think that support groups are a really great way to start, in terms of making them safe as well. I at some point tried to join a bi youth support group, and it was not very settling, because the Zoom link was easily accessible to anyone and everyone. So I think that's a really big thing about being able to engage them. And I think it's also really important to reach out online in terms of bi people of color. A lot of bi plus spaces struggle with being mostly white, and I do my best in terms of being an activist that is of color, to reach out to fellow members, but that's not always enough. It's important for others to stand up for us and to reach out with us and to be able to lift each other up. We're not competing for a very limited number of views. I think that we are the majority, so it is important to support each other, follow each other, share each other, and be that support net that we so desperately were in search of.
Thank you. Hugo?
Something that I was involved with like quite a few years back. It was teaching organizing skills to young queer people. How to hold an event, how to organize an event, how to plan a strategy. This isn't stuff they teach you in school. They don't even teach you how to organize your workday in school. That they're that bad. And it's something that can really make a difference, because then people have the tools to go do their things. And there's a lot of younger queer activists that got their start because they learn how to start a GSA, like stuff like that. And it's important to make sure that these skills get passed on.
I totally agree with that. We had similar issues, I think, here. That's one of the reasons that me and others have been working actually on a book on bipolitics, because we realized that we didn't have a way to share practices and theory in a way that it was for us. And I think that's one of the most important thing we can give to the next and current generation, actually, which is the history and what has been done and where actually you can find knowledge. So like resources like BiPan Library of the Bi Research Center and anything that actually could come into hand, because I think we risk of thinking that what we're experiencing is just something we experience alone. Nobody else has done this, but actually there's a lot of resources around. Thank you, Hugo. Anyone else?